Right, can everybody hear me? Great. Okay, I'll probably just give it another minute in case any other people turn up, and then I will crack on. I hope everyone's had a good week. I've actually just been prepping to go and assist a customer of ours tomorrow with a QUATRA install in London. So I spent my entire day prepping QUATRA units, and now I've got to talk about them some more. Right, I'm gonna crack on. So, are we full screen? Yeah, we're full screen. Great. So, as you may know, I think I recognise all your names. I'm sure you all know me. I'm Joe Fletcher, Head of Technical Services for OneAV. Today, we are going to be talking about QUATRA. So, QUATRA is I would say, the higher end Cel-Fi product. It's also much more suitable for larger installs, and I'll go into that a bit today. So, the Cel-Fi QUATRA system is designed to improve mobile coverage like the GoX, and it is the highest performing, most powerful, safest signal booster in its class. When we say class this time, so the major difference between QUATRA and the other Cel-Fi products is QUATRA uses Cat cable. It does use some RF cable just from the antenna to the main unit, but then from there on, it's all done over Cat, which is great. It's very similar in design, actually, to something like an access point system. So if you've ever done any sort of Wi-Fi access points or anything like that, it's really quite similar to that. But there's a couple of things to know. So, unlike the GoX, the main sort of selling point of the QUATRA system is its scalability. The problem with the GoX is it's got a finite amount of power and it's difficult to expand it much beyond that. And because you're relying on RF cabling from your main unit to your internal antennas, there's only so much loss you can have. So you really struggle to say go 50 meters from a main unit to an access point or something like that, because there'd just be too much loss. Because QUATRA utilizes Cat cable, there is no loss. So essentially you can go 100 meters. In fact, there are some repeaters. So you can go 100 meters, then put a repeater in and go another 100 meters. So it's very much designed for bigger installs. We're mostly specifying it into offices and sort of large houses, so mansions, houses that have multiple wings and things like that. Once you get to that sort of point, you really need to be looking at QUATRA because it's a much more scalable system than the GoX. So there are some alternatives out there. I will be spending some time talking today actually about what the alternatives are. I don't want to give you a sort of a one-sided sales pitch on why QUATRA is the only option out there. I will just tell you a little bit about what the alternatives are. But what you generally tend to find is if the area you're trying to cover is below 50,000 square meters. So there's actually a term that's used for that. It's called middle price. So a property that is above 50,000 meters squared is generally considered an enterprise level location. So as an example, you wouldn't use something like Cel-Fi QUATRA at an airport or something like that. But something like a warehouse, large offices with multiple floors, QUATRA's absolutely fine. In fact, QUATRA ends up being cheaper than all the alternatives. It's currently sort of the lowest cost solution for anything below 50,000 meters squared. Now, I'm going to be a little bit naughty today because there's actually a video that Cel-Fi have made. Forgive how American the video is. It's a very American video. But it does do a really good job of just explaining the basic principles of how QUATRA is wired. So I'm going to cheat and I'm going to use that rather than sort of explaining it over diagrams. So let me just get that up.
Cellular service is important for business, but indoor cellular problems for the workplace have traditionally been time-consuming and expensive to resolve. Densification of base stations or small cells can lead to increased interference. Introducing the Cel-Fi QUATRA in-building enterprise cellular system. Based upon award-winning Cel-Fi design principles, QUATRA takes enterprise-class service simplicity to new levels at a much lower cost than existing solutions. A single QUATRA system is comprised of a network unit and up to 4 coverage units. The network unit connects to the operator's network using built-in antenna or external antenna. Alternatively, it can be connected to a small cell. The cellular signal is then distributed to the coverage units. The coverage units amplify the signal and light up the building from the inside out. If your signal source is from a small cell, the combination of the small cell and the QUATRA system creates a supercell. Connections from the network unit are made with dedicated Cat5 cables. Power is delivered to the coverage unit over the same cables from a single power supply located at the network unit. If the cable run to any coverage unit exceeds 100 meters or 325 feet, you can use the QUATRA range extender to extend this distance up to 200 meters or 650 feet. A single QUATRA system can support between 10,000 and 50,000 square feet. For larger areas, multiple QUATRA systems can be used together and will self-organize. Both the network unit and coverage units are supplied with easy-to-use mounting brackets. The QUATRA system supports the following wireless features: WCDMA, HSPA+, LTE, MIMO, and supported networks, up to 100 dB of system gain in each band, simultaneous, peaceful coexistence with Wi-Fi, femtocells, and cellular devices, advanced digital echo cancellation and channel select filtering algorithms, automatic gain control based on fast real-time echo cancellation. Once your system is commissioned, you can track performance or manage it remotely from the cloud from any internet browser. If anything needs your attention, the system can let you know by email or text. Contact the team at Nextivity to find out more about the Cel-Fi QUATRA in-building enterprise cellular system.
Okay, sorry about that. I thought it should mute. It was meant to auto mute when that plays. Well, either way, I'll carry on. I mean, the link's there, so if anyone wants to watch that separately. So fundamentally, to go over the sort of the basics of a QUATRA system, essentially you have an antenna. One key thing to understand is that antenna requires 2 RF runs. I'll go into in a future slide a little bit about why that is. And then once the antenna has been run to the main network unit, everything runs over cat cable. And what happens is these can be cascaded, so you can have multiple systems running simultaneously. So if you need a bigger system, you can do that. If you need multiple network covers, you can do that. So there was a mention in that video of something called a small cell. So a small cell, they sort of come, in the UK, they come in 2 flavors. This one is one you'll be more familiar with. So it's called a femtocell. You've probably seen these. I know the Vodafone Sure signals are quite popular. They're basically devices that you connect to the network, and they provide a sort of a localized boost to a Wi-Fi signal. Then what they might do is you might have like plug adapters and things like that to put around the house that improve the signal. The main problem with these, they do work on smaller properties. The issue with them is they're very low power. So what the signal they're emitting is very, very weak, and they have to be because the box itself has really no amplification. It doesn't use that much power, so it can't boost the signal by that much. So they're an okay solution if you just need to improve coverage in one location in the house. But what they're really not good at is blanketing a house in signal like you can with Cel-Fi. So if you do a Cel-Fi project, you can confidently state that entire house is going to be absolutely covered in signal. You just can't do that with femtocells. They're fine as like a quick solution. And also one of the problems is I think some mobile providers don't even do them. I know the Vodafone one I see a lot, and I think there's an O2 one that I've seen around. But they're just very much just something like you're supposed to play a sort of plug and play thing. For our market, where we're looking to do things a little bit more scientifically, these are not really a solution. You can provide a much better coverage system for your customer utilizing an on-air repeater. The other thing they mentioned was a small cell. So you do see these sometimes. These are actually much bigger versions of the femtocell. So the problem with these, some companies do have these and have paid for them. The main issue with a small cell is the amount of time they take to get installed. So essentially, if you have a business or a home and you want to pay for a small cell, you can absolutely do that. However, last time I checked, the waiting list on average is about 6 months, and that is per network. So if you wanted to do all 4 networks in your home, you would have to contact each provider and arrange and schedule the installation of a small cell on your property. And for businesses, these are also a bit of an issue because what happens is they still use your internet connection. So you have to have a seriously robust sort of backplane to be able to handle the additional bandwidth of all these mobile phones. You know, if you've got 100 employees whose mobile phones are all connected, that's a lot of bandwidth. So that's another reason why potentially the small cell has sort of fallen out of favor. What you might find, I think that's on this next slide, is you might find actually that you go to an install where they've had previously a small cell installed and they would like that system improved or expanded. One cool thing you can do with QUATRA is there are some boxes that can convert the signal from an existing small cell to the type of signal that QUATRA needs to do. So essentially the QUATRA can act as an amplifier for an existing small cell system. So I think I have some diagrams. Yeah, so the way it basically works is, whereas typically the network unit would be connected to your antenna, what you do instead with a small cell is you use a small cell interface in place of an antenna and then convert that signal to something the network unit can use. And that way you get what Cel-Fi refer to as a supercell. So you take an existing small cell system and you boost it. That means you can add additional coverage. The key thing to remember with Cel-Fi that it's got over all these other solutions is a high amount, that 100 dBs of gain that it offers. Small cells do not have that. So when you install a small cell and distribute it over RF, there's very little gain applied to that signal. So what you end up with is a very weak signal that's not able to penetrate through even the sort of thinnest wall or a window or something like that. The main selling point on the Cel-Fi gear is the fact that it applies this huge amount of gain to the signal, so you get a very powerful signal. If you remember from previous slides, as long as you maintain separation between your donor antenna and your main network unit. So to give you some more examples of sort of the 3 main ways you install QUATRA. So you could have, so diagram 1 is a traditional off-air solution. So in diagram 1, we're installing an antenna on the roof, and then we're going to run cable down to the network unit, and then so that's RF cable down to the network unit, and then you're going to have CAT cable going to each floor where you're going to have a QUATRA coverage unit. Alternatively, you might find that actually towards the edge of the building, you have very good mobile reception. If that's the case, what you see quite commonly as well is just putting the antenna right next to the network unit. You install them next to each other because you don't need to put an antenna on the roof, because actually at the edge of the building, the signal's great. So what you do is you plan your project so that your main network unit is on the edge of the building with the antenna, and then you run your coverage units into the center of the building. So what you're doing is you're maintaining that separation between the coverage units, which are in the middle of the building, and the antenna on the far right in this diagram. So in an ideal world, you would always put an antenna on the roof because you're always going to get best performance that way. But actually, sometimes there can be, especially in certain types of building, that can be a real hurdle. I did a project at sort of the old BBC building, and basically the way it worked, the company that currently owned the top of the building weren't being particularly helpful. So it was going to take a long time to get permission to put an antenna on the roof. So instead, what we did is we found a location on the floor that we were doing the install in, where actually the signal was very good. And then we did the install there and ran it to the center of the building rather than on the roof. So again, to reiterate, antenna on the roof is always best. But if it's not possible, there is always the option of putting an antenna indoors in a location that has good signal. And the third option is the one we've already talked about. Perhaps they've got an existing small cell solution or a femto cell. You simply use the small cell adapter to convert that for QUATRA. So this is my last slide. So just to go over this. So this is how you would do a larger scale install. And there's a few things to note here. So what you've got is when you're splitting for QUATRA, things get a little bit more complicated. Now, if you remember when I showed you how to do splits for GoX last week, it was relatively straightforward. The tricky thing with QUATRA is because the antenna, QUATRA relies on something called MIMO, which is multi-in, multi-out. What that basically means is there is signal going in both directions that allows for more traffic. So QUATRA uses something called a MIMO antenna. Now, a MIMO antenna has two connectors, one for MIMO and one for something called EXA. And QUATRA needs both of those to work. So the antennas have two cables. So you would run two cables from this antenna to your network unit. Now, where you need a bit of planning is if, for instance, we're going to do a bigger install. Let's say we're doing a large office space, but they want 3 networks covered. So you've got O2, EE, and Vodafone being covered. What you then have to do is you have to split the EXA and MIMO separately, so you can't combine these. So you can't put the EXA and MIMO into one cable and then split them again, because then they're no longer separate signals. So when you're splitting, you have to maintain the separation. And this is something where people get caught out when they're doing these larger projects, because you get this slightly awkward situation where if you're doing multiple splits, you have to manage to maintain the MIMO. Is what we basically say is you need to keep these things separated. So you would have one splitter for EXA, one splitter for MIMO, and then you would make sure that each network unit got coverage from both of those splitters. So that's the sort of main challenge with your larger scale QUATRA systems, and in fact, not even just larger scale, but multi-network. If you remember, part of the licensing for these products that makes them legal is the fact that you're not allowed to have devices that do more than one network. So you have to have multiple devices. So for instance, you could do an install like this in someone's home where actually these are covering 3 networks. So you've got one system for each network. Unfortunately, there's no real way of lessening the amount of hardware you have to have because of the way the laws work in the UK. If someone came to you and said, I want all 4 networks covered in my home, and I have a large house, say a mansion or something like that, you need to do something like this. You need 4 separate QUATRA systems, one for each network, and it does get expensive. Typically, as a ballpark figure, it's about £5,000 per QUATRA system. So if someone wanted all 4 networks in a large house, you are looking at about £20,000 in hardware costs, which sounds like a lot, but in comparison to the alternatives of having the network come out and install like a fiber line or something like that, so you can get a femtocell, or having them come and do a small cell, for those solutions, you're looking at, again, at least a 6-month waiting list, and it costs far more. The other thing about sort of femtocell and small cell solutions is you don't own those, so they're always leased. So essentially, if a customer decides to go for a femtocell or a small cell as their solution rather than on-air repeater, they will essentially always be paying for that. You pay I think you have like a 3-year contract, and then that contract is renewed every 3 years. So at least with QUATRA, essentially they own the hardware, they own the system. If it needs to be recalibrated or they need to swap what network the system runs on, that can be done. Also, talking about 5G, a lot of the cabling and the antennas and things we're putting in, if down the line they decide they want to replace the system with a 5G capable system, all our cabling will still be good. They still own all that hardware, which you just don't with the existing solutions. So there are some other solutions out there. There's a company called Strato OpenCell who specialize in installing small cell solutions for properties. But the main, for our industry, I'm not going to say that they're not a good solution, but for our industry, you're looking for that ownership of hardware. They're not looking to be paying every year for their mobile phone coverage. They want to just buy a solution, and you also want, and you as an installer get to own that solution. You install it, it's done. Once it's done, it works. That's done, job done. Really, an on-air repeater is the solution you want to be looking at. So I believe that is my last slide. Oh no, I've got a couple more. Sorry, I forgot about these. So just to quickly go over some of the sort of the ports on here and things. So this is the main QUATRA network unit. So on the back, you have a power in. Then you have 2 antenna ins. So as I said, one of those is labeled EXA and MIMO. So those are the 2 you need to keep separated from your antenna. You've then got a LAN port. So you need that connected if you want to be able to cloud monitor your system. You don't actually need to leave these on the network. So if you're installing them somewhere where getting network access isn't easy, you don't need them to have network coverage. It's just useful from your perspective because it means you can make some adjustments and things like that remotely. They've also got a LAN out, so you can daisy chain into another QUATRA unit. And then very much like an access point or a router or something like that, you've got 4 CU outs. So each of these connects to your coverage unit and provides power to that coverage unit by PoE. And then in the next slide, we've just got the coverage unit, which is even more simple. So the coverage units just have an RJ45 in. They do have this extra MIMO antenna port. So if you were doing an install where actually rather than providing coverage to say one large open space, you were trying to provide coverage to lots of small offices, one thing you can do is actually you can convert the signal that is coming out of the QUATRA unit back to RF. So it's possible if you connect cables to this, what it does is basically it turns the antenna off inside the coverage unit, and then all the signal actually comes out of these ports. So then you could combine that with a splitter-based RF system, and rather than having one sort of large access point in the middle of the location, you could use a coverage unit to create lots of little access points. It's one of those things where if you need to do that, be aware you can do it, but just have a chat with me before you sort of spec the system, because I can easily advise on the proper way to do that. So you do this again if the way a room was laid out, it might make more sense than rather than doing one big access point to do lots of little ones, and that can be done as well. So I believe that is my last slide. So does anyone have any questions? I'll give people a little bit of time to type. Everyone okay? Okay, let me just check the questions a bit at the bottom. No questions there. Okay, that's great. So thank you very much. I think this is my last Cel-Fi webinar. I'll probably be repeating them again in a few weeks because there's a few people who missed the first ones. I think next week, I think we might be not doing next week, but I believe the next series I'll be doing is on the newly announced Aurora lighting. So we've recently become the UK distributor to this channel for Aurora lighting. So if you're not familiar with Aurora lighting, they are sort of a more custom install friendly alternative to something like Philips Hue. They've got a much more sort of expansive range and loads more options for doing things like Pete, I'll send you those. Yeah, Andy. So if in an office they wanted a solution that was for all the networks, so there's 4 main operators, your only option is to basically install 4 systems, 1 for each network, and that is down to the licensing laws in the UK. So there actually exists in America a product called the QUATRA 4000, which is a unit similar to these ones, a little bit bigger, but it does 4 networks all in one box, which obviously would be a fantastic solution in the UK. Unfortunately, the laws as they are at the moment mean that product is not legal. I know that Cel-Fi are working very hard with Ofcom to try and change the legislation further so that they are allowed to sell that product in this country. But at the moment, due to the laws, you have to install a separate system for each network. There's no way of combining systems or there's no legal all-in-one box. There are some illegal solutions, but if we're trying to do it legally, it's not possible to do it that way. You can do it, but it has to be 4 separate systems, 1 for each network, which does get expensive. But unfortunately, that's just that's the name of the game, really. That's what the law is in the UK at the moment. And Pete, I will send you the links. They're all on YouTube. If you find our YouTube channel, if you go to OneAV on YouTube, there all these webinars are on there. But if not, just drop me an email, and I will send those over to you. Great. All right. Well, thank you all very much for coming. If you're interested in learning more about Aurora, I think watch this space. I don't think I'm doing it next week. I think I'm starting the week after with a series of webinars on Aurora smart lighting. One really sort of key thing that I don't think people really get about Aurora is they actually have the option of making existing light fittings smart. So whereas with stuff like Hue, you have to put smart bulbs in. If a customer has a system that has either sort of unusual bulbs or bulbs that are designed in a way they like and they don't want to change that, Aurora has loads of options for doing retrofit smart installs. So you can take stuff like that and make them smart, make them work with control systems, make them synchronize and do all that crazy stuff you can do with smart lighting. But yeah, that is one sort of very cool thing about Aurora, and it's why we decided to distribute them, because we're big fans. Right, thank you very much. I will see you all at the next one, and thank you so much for coming.